In today's video, I'm making a large resin sculpture that encapsulates 5 different layers of natural material. These layers will be cast at different angles to bisect and overlap one another. The first thing to do is assemble the mould. The mould is formed from boards of pine that are held together with screws. Aluminium foil covers the boards to form the inside face of the mould. This method of mould making is great because it means I can use the same mould indefinitely and there is no cleaning of the mould required afterwards. The resin sticks to the aluminium foil, but as you will see later in the video, peels away very easily once the resin is hardened. I use PF700L, which is a water clear casting polyester resin. To seal the mould, I pour resin down each of the corners and wait for it to harden. This is a device that I made a while ago that I use to hold moulds at varying angles. It's made from pine boards and an old door hinge. The white cords you see wrap around a couple of screws in the base to hold the mould at the desired angle. I add a wedge here to also rotate the mould. This is the first of 6 pours I'll be making to form the piece, as shown in the diagram. The first and last pours are 700mm, with the 4 in between being 500mm. I'm using a low activity catalyst for all these pours as it slows down the curing process, which reduces the risk of the casting overheating and cracking. With the mould set up, I pour the first layer and wait for it to cure. Here I'm pouring a thin layer of resin on top of the previously poured and hardened layer. This will bond the first layer of natural material, which is the black slate. I swill the resin around to fully cover the surface, as I only want a very thin layer of resin here. I'm now adding the granules of black slate, which is just a matter of sprinkling them there manually. I try to avoid getting too much of the slate along the edges, as this can cause issues later on when sanding the final piece. Once the slate layer has hardened, I move on to forming the second layer, which requires the angle of the mould to be adjusted. Here you can see I'm also adding chamfered blocks. This will hold the mould at 45 degrees while on the support. This is the second layer being poured, which is 500ml. The next layer is silica, which is sprinkled on just like the previous layer. The thin layer of resin used to bond this layer I poured off camera. Here I'm just moving some of the silica from off the sides. Moving on to pouring the third layer, I've rotated the mould and will adjust the angle further with a wedge. I tend to do this after having poured the resin, so I can adjust the angle until it looks about right while the resin is still liquid. And now I'm sprinkling the third layer, which is the red sand. You can see here how the layers bisect one another and how you can see through one layer to the others behind. This layer is clear glass, with the final layer being small coloured stones. Now all the layers have been cast, all that is left is to pour one final layer with the mould horizontal. With the final layer hardened, the mould can now be disassembled and we can see how the casting has turned out. Here you can see how I mentioned earlier that the resin sticks to the foil, but it is easy to peel the foil off from the resin once it has hardened. This is the first time I can see the piece from the side and the different layers when they overlap and cross past one another. I think it's going to look pretty good. I'm now outside and using a belt sander to sand the sides flat and square. This is a messy job and so my least favourite part of the process. I also have to be careful that the resin doesn't chip on the edges or corners, as it's very hard but brittle. After the rough sanding is complete, I use wet and dry paper to refine the flatness and remove the large scratches left by the belt sander. I start with 60 grit and get down to 120. Overall it takes about 8 to 10 hours of sanding, which of course I do over a period of a week or two. This is the surface after the 60 grit wet and dry. It still has fairly large scratches, but the sides are now flat. This is after a number of hours of sanding going down the grits. After this, it will be ready for polishing. And with the polishing mostly complete, it's time to show you the final piece. hope you liked the final piece. I'd love to hear what you thought of it. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.